To see you again. You can hear me okay? Cool. Um, yeah, it seems like it hasn't been a month. It seems like it's just like a couple days ago um that we met last. And while I'm pulling up my screen to share, yeah. Um, let's see. I don't This is doing me a bit dirty again. Let's see. I want to go full screen, but it's not letting me. I don't know. Can you guys see this okay? The text? Okay. So we'll chant the lineage prayer and refuge, and then we'll pick up where we left off last time. Ondo je chang chen te lo na dang mar ba mi la cho je gam bo ba du so she sha gung yen ga ma ba ji ji chung ge gyu ba ze na dang ri ta sa su pa le dru ba so za lan cha gya chi la na nye be nya me dro gon da bo ka gyu la so wa de so ka gyu la ma nam gyu pa zen no nam da jing lo jen lo gong gi kang ba sung ba jen zeno kun la cha je me ba dang se de do ta ju be gon chen la ye gu zhen ba me ba jing ge lo mo gu gong ge go wo song ba jen me na te go je be la ma la gyundu so wa de be gon la kyo mi mo gu ke wa jin ge lo eng me gong gi no je son ba jin gang sha to pe no so ma de ma chu de ka jog be gon chen la gon ja lo da dra wa jing lo nam do no wo chu gu son ba jin ji ma yin ji yang cha wa la ma ga ro ba cha we gon chen la Kode yeme toba jinge lo yewa guntu yanda lama dang Rame chuki pala long ju jing sada langi nyon den la zone doje changi ngopa nyo do sho Dorje Changi Gopanyo Dosho. Great Vajradhara, Tilo, Naro, Marpa, Mila, Lord of the Dharma, Gampopa, knower of the 3 times, the omniscient Karmapa, holders of the 4 great and 8 sublineages, Drikung, Taglung, Salpa, glorious Trugpa, and so forth, masters of the profound path of Mahamudra, unequaled protectors of beings, the Dagpo Kagyu. I supplicate you, O Kagyu Gurus. Please bless me to hold your lineage and follow your example. Revulsion is taught to be the foot of meditation. Grant your blessings to this meditator who does not cling to food or wealth and cuts all the ties to this life. And bless me to be unattached to honor and gain. Devotion is taught to be the head of meditation. The Guru opens the gate to the treasury of oral instructions, to the meditator who continually supplicates him. Grant your blessings that uncontrived devotion arises. Awareness is taught to be the body of meditation. Whatever arises is fresh, the essence of realization, to this meditator who rests simply without altering it. Grant your blessing that my meditation is free from conceptuality. The essence of all thought is taught to be Dharmakaya. Nothing whatever but everything arises from it. Appearing for this meditator, it is an unceasing play. Grant your blessing that I realize the inseparability of samsara and nirvana. Through all my births, may I not be separated from the holy gurus and so enjoy the splendor of Dharma. May I perfect the qualities of all the paths in the bhumis, and may I speedily attain the state of Vajradhara. Sangye Chudang Soki Chunala Changchu Bardu Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jin Soki Pe Sonangi Drula Penche Sangye Drupa Shu Sangye Chudan Suki Chunala Jiangchu Bardu Dani Kyao Su Ji Dagi Jin Soki Pe Sonangi Drola Penche Sangye Drupa Shu Sangye Chudang Suki Chunala Jiangchu Bardu Dani Kyao Su Jim Dagi Jin Suki Pe Sunangi Drola Penche Sangye Drupa Shu. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and the noble Sangha. Through the merit of accomplishing the 6 perfections, may I achieve awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. So I've got to get better at my screen sharing. This much is true. I need to, that document needs a little bit of tidying up, and then also it's not letting me go full screen sometimes the way I'd like to. You know, we're losing a little real estate showing you the thumbnails and whatnot, but that's how it is. I'm not that technically savvy actually. So my hope was to do since there were 4 sessions, to do one contemplation for each session, but last time we only made it halfway through the first one, so we'll see where it goes. But I think we did well. So I'm not too worried. I mean, time is kind of, I don't know. It's like one of those things where, of course, you could make the case like time is relative and all these other kind of things with Dharma, but it's more important that the time is well spent, I think. So, mm. So we're continuing with we had talked about the eight freedoms that having a life with Dharma uh, has these eight freedoms. And where we left off was going into the 10 resources, like things that are kind of not just having a freedom, but having something kind of in our favor. And Rinpoche says he's like there's 5 internal and 5 external. In addition to the 8 freedoms, we definitely possess the 10 resources. These are divided into 5 resources within oneself and the 5 resources that arise externally. And so he starts with the 5 internal. The first internal resource is that being among the 6 realms, we have been born as a human being. This is a fundamental necessity because basically only human beings can practice Dharma. So this text doesn't jump in with it, the torch of certainty. That's kind of what I'm referencing. It's Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's retreat explanation on that. But if you look at a text like the Jewel Ornament of Liberation by Gampopa, he starts with Buddha nature and then explains precious human birth and all these things. And I something I really like about Gampopa's explanation, I can say in brief, is that all beings have Buddha nature, but only human beings have the ability to practice Dharma. So, for example, like animals have Buddha nature, and every other kind of being that we talked about last week or last session, excuse me, have Buddha nature, but they don't have accessibility to it. And so similarly, when we talk about our resources, or our situation around it, our circumstance, maybe that's another way to kind of talk about it. It's that we have Buddha nature and we have an opportunity, but it's putting that into play. Ultimately, in the Kagyu tradition, sometimes I mention this a lot if I'm kind of talking on Nundro, which is what the larger context of this teaching is around, but it's not really a Nundro teaching in the way we're saying it tonight. But the Mahamudra, the Kagyu lineage is really like the Mahamudra lineage. Like the lineage prayer we just said was the Mahamudra lineage prayer. So the idea is like, Mahamudra is the meditation approach that Kagyu's, it's a unique approach to meditation. It has its own methodology and technique, but it's about accessing directly our Buddha nature. So this whole thing, whether you talk about it, like I think I said last session, that a lot of it, the 4 thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma could sound like an entry level thing, but it's very pertinent to advanced or applying practitioners. If you've had higher teachings on subjects like Mahamudra or Dzogchen, I mean, that's really related to Buddha nature anyway. It's just more direct rather than implied, or it's talking about mind on its own terms rather than working with mind so that mind's more workable, which more fundamental teachings might say. Anyways, it's important to mention that because I think sometimes these can sound like preclusive, like certain beings can't, are doomed. And it's like, they don't have a human body in this life. They might not have access to Dharma yet in this life, but that doesn't mean they don't have Buddha nature. And we just have to remember that. The second resource is having been born in a central country, not on a borderland. Central country in this respect means with respect to Dharma. We've been born in a place where they have the opportunity to reach Dharma. This can refer to either places where Dharma has been for a long time or where it is newly spread. In either case, there is the opportunity for study and practice. So this is an interesting one. Central countries, if you look at more, I guess you'd say like real deep traditional, like old school Buddhist teachings, they might say a central teaching is where like Buddhism is the state religion. In that case, the only country that really counts now is probably Bhutan. And other countries can be favorable to Dharma, but they might have varying religions and things like that. But the idea is, what if you're born in a place where there isn't Dharma? There's not access to Dharma is basically the idea. So Rinpoche, I think that they're saying this because we live in the modern world as opposed to the old world of Buddhism as a world of plurality. We have freedom of religion. So you might be in a country where Buddhism's a minority, but you can access it, practice it, progress in it and things like that. You have the freedom to do it. The third internal resource is to possess complete faculties. This means the sense faculties in general, but especially the mental faculty of a clear mind or mindfulness, and most particularly the faculties of faith, respect, loving kindness, and compassion. So you could say faculties in terms of like being able to see, to read the Dharma, being able to hear the Dharma, having sense faculties, and then the mental faculty to kind of be able to put it all together, to adhere, to understand the words, to understand the concepts. Not everyone has that. Like we have that right now, but we might not always have it. We could lose our eyesight. We could lose our sense of hearing, or we could lose our mind a little bit. Like we might lose our memory, the ability to put all these concepts together and express them to ourselves. So to have it incomplete. But I also really like that Rinpoche is including things that are, I think, it's like they're calling them faculties, but it's almost like a bit of our character as Dharma people, like faith. We have faith in the Dharma. We have respect for the Dharma, loving kindness. These are things again that and Rinpoche says compassion too, but they're things that like we shouldn't take for granted. Like sometimes, for instance, if someone has respect for the Dharma, maybe they're around it too much and take it for granted. Maybe their faith is something that's strong for a while, but then it lapses and they lose that. Or like loving kindness, like sometimes life gets harder and harder. And what if Dharma helps our character for a while, but what if we lose that? You know what I mean? Like that's something that we shouldn't just presume. Like say, I'm a Dharma person. I've got all these qualities. Like, yeah, they're close to our character, but they might not be entirely stable. Like we should appreciate them and continue to expand on them, to have them grow further and further. The fourth resource is that our actions are not perverse, that we have not turned onto a negative course of action. This refers to a situation in which you have undertaken one or more of the three vows, but have turned away from the disciplines of Dharma, have come to think that Dharma is bad and not true, and in short, have turned your back from the good towards the bad. So in other words, to kind of it would be expanding on that last thing I was saying. Like, but you could say that like through, the word action here, like through the course of actions that we're growing towards the Dharma, and in terms of our appreciation of it, just in general, and not making choices for ourselves or falling into choices and circumstances that take us in another way. The fifth internal resource is faith and respect for spiritual friends. So Gampopa basically, when he's explaining this in the jewel ornament, talks about like having that contact with a spiritual friend, someone who can help us bring it forth. But we have to have, in short, it's not just contact, but he goes further. It's having faith and respect towards a spiritual friend, because it's one thing to have Buddhahood, it's one thing to have Buddha nature. It's one thing to have the freedom to do these things, but you need a resource in Dharma friends. The principle of Sangha, like other people who practice and have who value the same, who value the teachings and practice the teachings and uphold them and encourage us, but then also specifically guides who have progressed along the path further than us, who can, you could say, court us and really teach us right from wrong developmentally, to show us the path, to make it, you could say, to make the path progress, if that makes sense. So that the path is not just something that's looking at a highway, like say that you were to kind of go out like a hiking trail. That's maybe a better example. And if you were to just stand at the entrance to the trail, you need to go along the path. We need to move forward. And a spiritual friend is someone who can really give that direction for us. Then the 5 external resources. The first of the 5 external resources is that the Buddha has appeared in our world in our time. And Rinpoche says, if you were born as a human being during this fortunate kalpa, but at a time where the Buddha had not appeared, there would be no use in being born human in that world. You would have no opportunity to practice Dharma. So the, how to say this, every world system has Buddhas. That's one of their aspirations. But if you're born at a time where the Buddha has not yet taught, then it's as though you, like we said, having, like, if you were born in a country where there is Dharma and there's access to the teachings, but what if you were born in a time and place where the word Buddha or the idea of Buddha had never been heard? There are beings where that's the case. They lived and died at a time where there wouldn't have been that. So it's almost like that's unfortunate, of course. But if you think of it for us, we're at a time where that has happened. If you are around people, I mean, some people might say, I've never heard of the Buddha. That would be unfortunate in our time and day and age. But fortunately for us, we and our friends, we have heard of this, and other people have too. I mean, there's people who might not have pursued it, but they might admire it. They might be at a stage of interest or at least awareness. If you've done a sociology class or like a world history class, you may have heard of the Buddha, so it's like that alone is just fortunate to hear the name. The many beings in the history of you could say the worlds or world systems, that's not the case. Secondly, not only did the Buddha appear in our world, but he turned the wheel of Dharma in many ways. So it's interesting. It's like, not only imagine if you lived at the time of the Buddha, but he hadn't yet taught, or you could say weren't in proximity of the teaching. But the Buddha taught. He taught. There's 3 turnings of the wheel of the Dharma, and he left a lineage of teaching. And that's the next one, is that the teachings have survived. Even if the Buddha had appeared and taught extensively, if his teachings had vanished before we were born, there'd be no use in being born human at this time and place. This is not the case. So I'll give an example, and I might be, it's interesting. Like, I remember a teacher pointing this out, that he thought, actually it's Taisutra Rinpoche, and he said he thought that, like, when he heard of Greek mythology, he thought the stories were so cool and the characters were so cool, and the metaphors and the you could say just I don't know, the tragedy around characters, like the compelling story of each character was so impressive to him, and the magical powers and all this and that. But then it occurred to him, he's like, there's no extant lineage of it. Like, you can't go and, like, let's say you had a question with Dharma, you could go to a Lama or go to the Sangha that exists now and ask questions. They could clarify the questions, and they could, like I said earlier, they can indicate direction on your own personal path to understanding the teachings. A lot of that must have existed around something like Greek mythology. Truly, I mean, it probably was like the most impressive thing at its time and place for those people, but it's not here anymore. Like, it's not a living tradition in the sense of happening now. And that was his example for it, but it stuck with me because I always liked Greek mythology as a kid. I liked to read, and I thought the characters were neat. And the 5th and final external resource is the kindness of others. It means, even though the Buddha's teachings are present in the world now, without the kindness of teachers and spiritual friends who were, for example, they would provide empowerment, transmission, and instruction with compassion to their disciples, we would have no opportunity whatsoever to benefit from the teachings. So, summing that all up, Rinpoche says it's absolutely certain that each and every one of us possess the full set of these 10 resources in their completeness. This is not a random occurrence. The possession of all these conditions together in your life at once is the ripening at one time of vast amounts of merit accumulated over exceedingly numerous kalpas. If you don't understand this, you might think that you have attained these freedoms and resources this time, so surely I will get them again and again. But this is not the case. In this life, in your present circumstances, all of your previous merit has ripened at once. So all your good merit has ripened at once. If you don't use this opportunity to practice Dharma, then because you will have used up all this merit and this auspicious ripening, you will definitely not acquire this opportunity again. It's not saying you won't have any good karma going forth, particularly if you're practicing now, but if you use it up now, if you squander the opportunity to practice now, these freedoms and resources can only arise in the presence of their cause. So, in other words, Buddha Dharma, we'll talk about karma hopefully as this progresses, but it's all predicated on cause and effect. Like the cause and effect, the cause of suffering. Buddha talked a lot about suffering, and he talked about happiness, and you could say the cessation of suffering. But everything happens with a cause, and so causes ripen in the cause in the past will ripen in the future. Whatever we're causing now will develop for us in the future of our minds going forward. And so whatever we're experiencing now must have had a cause. And the cause of coming in contact with Dharma, the ability to have, if you were to say it briefly, like the perspective of virtue and sanity. Like not all beings have much sanity. We kind of think we do when we're thinking well on ourselves. But if we really look at some of our poor choices in mind, when we're not being mindful, when we're not being dharmic, then we can see very easily what effect has that had on us. Do you know what I mean? So certainly if we have the opportunity to practice virtue, to contemplate sane choices, to contemplate kindness, like that must have come from something really good. And that's what this is really pointing out, that there's been some goodness in our mind streams throughout beginning this time. And there's been some suffering and confusion too, but having the fortune to encounter teachings that focus on that has the cause. So it's and in short, if we were to just say something about karma is that, well, actually, I don't want to go too far into karma because that's almost a different topic in the book. So Rinpoche continues to say, you may think I have this precious human body, but I can wait. I can devote the best years of my life to accomplishing mundane ends, and when I'm done, I'll practice Dharma. But you should realize that your body is not permanent, stable, and unchanging entity. It is extremely fragile. And he's quoting from what is the Nundo text. He says, these precious freedoms and resources are difficult to acquire and easily destroyed. Now will we make them meaningful? So putting that into context a little, we have to say this, is that the good fortune that we were just talking about that came from previous virtuous wishes, good deeds, things like that, that's now caused us to have the opportunity to work with our minds and have a path of Dharma now, that has one cause, but it's easily destroyed. So going back to some of these other ideas, like what if, like I was saying before, like we might say, oh, I've got my senses intact. I've got my mind intact, but that can change. Human beings lose eyesight sometimes, hearing. We lose our minds, our body. It might not serve us indefinitely. Or, it was talking about being in a central country. What if we're there's beings that live in times of total peace and prosperity in a country. And then in a matter of time, it's total chaos. No one, much less can practice Dharma or religion, but like they might not have a moment's peace, of just endless harm on each other constantly. Or spiritual friends. One time, sometimes we have teachers in our lives and we can practice and then they might not be there. So any of these kind of things can the circumstances can change, I guess, is the main part about when you say easily destroyed. So we have to make this opportunity that we have meaningful. We have to practice. We have to work with our minds. We have to if you say that, what is that? It's like working with our body, speech, and mind. For some of us, it might have already been spelled out. Like we might have grabbed a hold of some, aspect of practice, like, oh, I do Nundro, or I do Mani mantras, or, something like this, or I do Tonglen. But the idea is we need to hear, contemplate, and meditate on the Dharma. If you're at different stages, and I mean, like if you've been around a long time, sometimes we still need to hear the Dharma. quite often all of us need to contemplate the Dharma. I think the more we contemplate it, the better we practice anyway. But a lot of times we don't personalize it. We don't really reflect on what it means to us. We absorb it kind of in a rhetorical sense, like information or um, guardrails, maybe, which aren't bad guardrails, and it's not bad information. But we have to internalize it. We have to really look at our own minds and say, well, gosh, what's going on with me? What's going on in here? And then what does the Dharma say about when that happens to people? And then you put it together and say, okay, now what do I need to do about what's going on in here? The fragility of the situation is extraordinary. If you think back, how many people do you know who have died? More every year. And when you think about how they died, many were without warning. Actually, last week we were with Lama Karma on the Chinrezig. And, we knew Amy McCracken was sick for quite a while. They knew that would happen, actually, a week or two out. But Linda Patrick, 2 or 3 weeks before that, was in a call. There was Ken Dusun, who was one of the founders of the Hartford KTC. He died. And Linda was on the call doing Chinrezig. So it's like, what if one of us were to be not here during the next meeting? Like, really not here, like pass on. It could be me. You might have to call someone else to explain why everything's impermanent next week or next session. But it could very much be that way without warning. And actually, that was Lama Karma's message to us, that these things don't always announce themselves or kind of set up a nice, tidy schedule for us. You know what I mean? It's like, but how, everyone we know, when you think about it, how many people do we know have died? Every year more. And when you think about how they died, wait, there is not always a time to prepare for death. It can happen at any moment. And there is no way to escape death. When it's time, you can't like barter with it or wait or negotiate or anything like that. No matter how successful you are in prolonging your life, eventually you are definitely going to die. There is no limit to the number of conditions that can cause your death. Actually, I'll say one more line and then I'll have a contemplation to add. When your body meets that one condition, that's it. It's finished. The only thing keeping you alive is your breathing. If you fail to breathe in, having breathed out, that's it. You're dead. That's Rinpoche. Patrul Rinpoche brings up this interesting point in Words of My Perfect Teacher that always was even crazier. He takes it to this another level. He's like, even the things that sustain your life, that you use to stay alive, can kill you. Like, so you might say like water. Well, you could drown with water. You could choke on the very food you eat. You could die from the medicine you take. Like if you take the wrong dosage or there was a mix up in the medicine, or you paired it with something that you're not supposed to pair it with. It's like all it takes is a series of events and choices. And once that, like Rinpoche is saying, like once that one condition falls into place, it stops supporting this whole mind body being connected. And of course the body is just a bunch of stuff tied together with its own like sinews and stitches a little bit, so to speak. But once that all starts to unravel, I mean, you can't put it all back together again. So it's over. They disconnect. And then Rinpoche says, recognize that you have acquired a set of freedoms and resources that is extremely powerful, but at the same time, extremely fragile and impermanent. Resolve that you will use this situation to be of the utmost benefit to yourself and others. In short, generate the intention to bring all beings to Buddhahood. That being the ultimate aim, acquire all of the intelligence and understanding, compassion, and diligence that are required. I'll add one other contemplation before we kind of pause for a minute, is the other issue with the precious human birth, a human birth is also, when we compare it to other circumstances, I don't know. Sometimes people don't want to talk about all the six realms of beings and stuff, but irrespective, actually, either way, you can do a lot of good things in with your lifetime karmically, or you can do a lot of bad things like we do. And so it's one of those things where it's not only an opportunity to live meaningfully and to practice virtue and connect with our Buddha nature, it's also the opportunity to do all the opposite as well, or to just live very helter-skelter. Like even if you look at habitual tendencies like kleshas in our mind's habits, they're actually quite ordered and strong. So they're very hard to break free of. Like it's hard to break free of habit. That's one aspect. But on the other aspect, they're totally chaotic. Like they're so desperate that like our mind gets so crazy, it does all kinds of things that make no sense. Like some of it makes sense because it's locked in. Like habit reinforces habit, reinforces habit, and they're hard to break free. But at the other hand, it's total madness too. So, anyways, I wanted to see if anyone has any thoughts. Because we didn't really have too much time last week, or I keep saying last week, last session, to talk into anything. And I don't just want to talk out at you. Plus, these are good things to talk about with Dharma friends and contemplate and things like that. You may have all heard it before, and it's okay to just hear it again. Sometimes for me, the more I say it and think over it, it hopefully chips away a little something in my own stubbornness and habits. Hopefully.
What? There's a question. Daniel has a question.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Well, I have a comment about precious human birth. And I remember when I first started going to some teachings and the Lama was talking about, you know, how precious the human life is. And I remember how, I guess, narrow-minded I was like, well, there's 6 billion people on the planet. That's a lot. What's the problem here? And then he was talking about insects and ghosts and demigods and all this. And, then I started to think about I turn over a rock and there's 500 ants right there. And
Yeah.
so one thing I noticed that I have more of an appreciation of my human life is just going out in my backyard and there's flies everywhere and there's ants and there's beetles. And it's like, man, there must be 10,000 critters in my own backyard. And here I am, a human who found the Dharma.
Yeah, and you could look at around here and say, I mean, and that analogy with the rock is a classic one because you could see hundreds of like kind of nearly microscopic, beings there's some insects you can see like lots of ants like you said, and there's some that are so small you're like, I don't even know if I see legs on this thing, but it's moving, and that kind of thing. But you look on a class like this and we say, oh wow, it's a fair number of us. But I don't know if you got on like what is it the highway out there. They all have number names, but if you were to drive on them, you'd pass this many people who are certainly probably aren't thinking about Dharma at the moment. Presumably, but how many of them? Let's say some of them do like Dharma. Would it be 1 in 100 people that we drive by? If you went to a crowded airport, would it be 5 and that are at the airport practicing Dharma? And yet like it's a really interesting thing because like I work at a place with like 10,000 people, and I bet you no one there has heard of a 3-year retreat. They're really smart scientists and all, but they've never heard of it. And I'm between DC and Baltimore, and yet like if you look, like I was seeing some pictures of the monks walking for peace at the Capitol, yesterday that one of my friends was at. He sent me the pictures and it's huge. It's like a huge crowd. There is this need for people to have peace and sanity in a path. Like they're there because they want to feel like the idea was peace. Like beings want peace. They're walking for peace, and the people who go to see them are inspired. They think, oh, I like peace, or I want more peace in my life. Like peace is good. But like, I mean, if you really look at it, it's like how many people are there, but might not have, they have a respect for the Dharma, but might not have practice. Like I'll give you one. It's like I remember like seeing the Dalai Lama at the National Cathedral, which is also one of the places that they were at. And like many of the people there just love the Dalai Lama, but they weren't Dharma practitioners, so to speak. Like, I mean, meaning like they might know the Mani mantra and might be interested, but haven't necessarily said like, I am a Buddhist, I'm on the path, I have a teacher, or things that you might find more common in a Dharma center. But yeah, relatively, they say that like like comparison, that like for example, like that beings who have realized the nature of their mind at any given time is like seeing a star in the daytime. It's like, I mean, it's a poetic image, but you don't see stars in the daytime. There aren't beings, there are not that many realized beings running around the world, but just beings who have encountered with Dharma to different varied degrees, to live in a country. I mean, there's like we said, there's countries and times and places where it's been outlawed to practice the Dharma, actually, even in Tibet at one point in time. But yeah, I mean, to have this in our life is and what to say too, there's lots of people who when you take it to the point of Buddha nature, that's to really talking about the part of a person. If you really just talk about it from a human angle for a minute, like Buddha nature is the part of us that wants to wake up, wants to be happy. It's not necessarily, there's a lot to say on Buddha nature, like from a real specific point of view, like in other words, like how to bring it forth and things like that, like the qualities of what is Buddha. Yes, but if you're talking about ground Buddha nature, the Buddha nature that's in all beings, not necessarily the fruition of Buddha, all beings already want to be happy and want to wake up and don't want to suffer. I mean, and if you really look at it even crazier, like all the samsaric things beings do is in an attempt to not suffer. But if you don't have a real path, then like how many times in our lives have we done the things we say, I don't want to suffer anymore, and we do the exact thing, or we do some attempt, like a foolhardy, not well thought out, short-sighted, self-centered approach to make ourselves not suffer, that because it's short-sighted, because it's self-centered, almost surely plays out and just at least in adding more complexity to our lives, but certainly adds more suffering to our lives and others much of the time. But if we are really within the parameters of Dharma, like if we're practicing things like just principles of thinking of others, of recollecting that things might not have a fixed nature. I mean, you could say emptiness for some people. That's we haven't gone there in this group yet. But my point is to see that things might not have a fixed nature. Things might not be what they seem. Like these, like thinking that way, thinking of the principle of shamatha, of just a peace abiding for a moment, or vipassana, seeing things clearly. Like to have that is so amazing. Even if we just have it interruptedly in our lives from time to time, because all the other choices we're making, trying to be happy, it's not how to say this? It's not a inappropriate thing. That's how beings think. That's how, I mean, it's all over the Bodhisattva's way of life. But if you, I mean, you can even assert it. You could say, if you don't understand somebody and what the hell they're doing, just know that that person's doing it because they think it's going to make life better and it's going to work. And it may make absolutely no sense why they're climbing that weird mountain the way they're doing it. But that's what's going through their mind. They think that's correct. And so the teachings basically add framework to say, this is what works. I mean, and it's not necessarily a laundry list. It's more like an approach. Like, in other words, if you work with your mind like this while you do the things you do, I mean, meditatively, you could definitely say it in post meditation as well. But in meditation, it's like we're in accord with how to work with our mind in life. Annie, am I saying it right, Annie?
Sorry. Daniel's question brought up another question, probably an inappropriate question, but I'll ask it anyway.
Excellent. Yeah.
We, as humans, are the world for, I think, millions of critters that live in our intestines, and the rest of our body is full of beings that help us stay alive. So when we get enlightened, and I'm still thinking that it will happen one day,
I hope so.
do they also get enlightened?
Oh, this is interesting.
And it's Daniel's fault for asking this question because he.
Oh, Daniel. No, it's a good one. There's several views on this, that you could say could say several considerations. I think of it all the time, actually, because I make my own yogurt at home, and I like to eat it, and it has probiotics in it, and I need it, especially if I take antibiotics. They work too well on me. No, one way is that, like, and we couldn't live without these beings, actually.
Right.
Like, we couldn't, like they're doing us a solid, and we're doing them a solid when we eat the food that they then eat. A really strong Vajrayana view brings up this idea that the body has many deities in it. Now, you could say, well, these are sentient beings, they're not deities. And I would argue that depends how refined your view is. A very masterful Vajrayana person would see all beings as deities, not as beings. That's the distinction between Vajrayana and Mahayana. Mahayana sees something as worthy of compassion. Vajrayana seeing it as not only as it's like worthy of compassion, unless you're seeing it as a deity. If you're seeing it totally pure, but nevertheless, the point is, if you see it as a sentient being that will, that like has a very brief life, you can pray for those beings and offer to those beings, and think about it from time to time, like, hey, we live in symbiosis. Like, I exist because of you, you exist because of me. We have some weird connection.
Yeah.
And it sounds weird in one hand, like, but it's not. Like, if you were to encounter another being right now that's a friend, and they've supported you, you've supported them, then it's the kind of thing when they pass on in their journey, who knows? Like, they might very well be live as a very brief being in that way. But in the sense of their Buddha nature, they don't, if it's a being that we're talking about, we're not seeing it with the pure view of a deity for a minute, then they're not only worthy of compassion, but of our thanks. So you can make an offering to them of your food, and then also, hope that they progress along the path.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a bad thing, actually. It's good to think into these, like, how things are connected and how they play out, even if it seems subtle, because they're just supporting your life very briefly, just like a friend would, who might have more obvious imminent qualities. Like, maybe their sense of humor helps you. Well, little organism might not have a sense of humor, but if you didn't have it, so we should be thankful. Yeah, Lisa, I see.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you.
So like animals, how do they get, if they're not aware of how to meditate in like their mind, how do they get to a higher realm? How does that Is it just like a natural process? Like,
So there's some stories. There's one of some arhat who I should know better, but basically he was if I'm not mistaken, was a fly that landed on a pig, on mud on a pig, and the pig, frustrated with the fly, ran around a stupa several times, and that created a proximity cause of that being to then be born close to the Dharma. Another is it's either Vasubandhu. I think Vasubandhu in a previous life was a pigeon, but it might have been the pigeon listening to Vasubandhu. But just know it has something to do with Vasubandhu, that basically there was a pigeon that listened to a master reciting. And then that created, like, the pigeon liked the sound of the chanting and the reciting of Dharma. And that created a cause for the being to therefore bring it forth. The idea, one thing that comes up a lot around when you hear about monastics, actually, is that when they wear the robes, it symbolizes Dharma. And so, for example, like Songsar Khyentse Rinpoche was saying about the monks that were just in DC, that for just all these people to just turn on their TV and see these people, like there's a lot of Americans, like, we are around Dharma, but there's a lot of people, like, this is happening in the Southeast of the United States too. There's a lot of people who might not have ever even seen anything like this. Just to be frank, like, in other words, like, gosh, what's going on down the street? Weird. Like, there might be some 7-year-old kid who's like scratching his head, like, I don't know, these guys look kind of weird. And it might be in his mind forever. Like, just, you might say, oh, that's a judgmental thought. Could be. Like, some people might say, oh, those guys look kind of weird, and I don't know about that. But what if a kid says, yeah, that's weird, but I don't know about it? Like, in other words, it creates curiosity. Curiosity is very close to judgment anyway. You know what I mean? Like, they could be a little threaded. Like, if we're not curious, if we're not able to be curious, we judge. So, but my point is like the proximity, seeing beings. Now, why is it important? It's not advertising the teaching. I mean, it's not just that they're advertising the teachings. You could say they're a good monastic would be one who, like, they're composing themselves in such a way that's inspiring and it's communicating peace. Like, that's literally one of the things that I shouldn't say too much on it, because, like, that's Vinaya and that's for monks, and I'm a lay yogi. I don't exactly do that. I mean, but that is one thing that they inspire in others, and that's that alone. I mean, that's not out of range for me to say, but because it could sound like, well, if I'm judging someone's conduct, you could say, but they inspire peace. And so that's good. And so, for example, if you do your Dharma practice around your pet, they might hear you the mantra and say, I don't know what they're just like a kid. They might say, kind of scratch their head probably, like, I don't know what that is, but it's certainly, she's a little calmer than she was an hour ago. And that's kind of nice. And it sounds lovely. And, gosh, so, and things are really nice and still in the room. And, animals, if you look at animals in general, their situation karmically is like prey and predator, which is not a peaceful state. Like, I mean, so for an animal to just be around peace, you know what I mean? It's like, that might be as close to getting familiar with their Buddha nature as we would be. And in our case, like, we had Buddha nature before we were exposed to Dharma. Like, so we might say, like, on our own, like, man, I feel nice. And, like, say we did something thoughtful and loving, and just out of nowhere, like, maybe our parents taught us how to do something right, and we did it for once. We might say, like, oh gosh, that felt really good. Do you know what I mean? Or like, man, I'm just kind of sitting here waiting on a bus, but gosh, it's such a beautiful day, and I'm just sitting here, and it's nice to sit and breathe. Like, we might be de facto meditating, or as close as we've ever been. And so then when we hear about meditation, we hear about compassion, we're like, it's not totally alien to us. We're a little close. And I think that's how it works. In fact, that is how it works. It's just like, that's me breaking it down that way.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have I'm going to play off of what Lisa said a little bit. So every morning I open my altar and out comes my water bowls and I go from one room to another. And my dogs, I've always wondered about this because they follow me in there and they know exactly what I'm going to do. And they sit and they watch. And I've always wondered how that would affect them. So this is really interesting to hear about because and when we had teachings at Jody's house, their Lama Kathy would say, "Oh, Dharma dogs," because we always have dogs
Yeah.
around and say Dharma dogs. So this is I find this really interesting. And then talking about impermanence, like we've been talking about, I read somewhere that impermanence impermanence doesn't mean nothing counts. Impermanence doesn't mean nothing matters. It means everything counts. And I've been thinking a lot about that. Can you expand on that a little, on your thoughts?
The next contemplation, like in the next session, will mostly be impermanence. But yeah, there's an interesting thing that happens when you contemplate impermanence. That like when you start to look at the fact that things don't last, there can be a sense of meaninglessness that dawns upon us. And I mean that as superlative meaninglessness. Like, man, I was sitting here having a vendetta against an old friend about some minor infraction in our friendship, or gossiping about things, or I'm caught up in the news again, or like I'm like holding old grudges, or never getting around to like things. Like impermanence, having a sense of what's meaningful and meaningless, like impermanence can draw that line for us. And so there may be a period of, you could say, superlative meaninglessness dawn on us. Like, I'm not going to argue about sports anymore. I'm not going to watch 8 sitcoms a night or something like that. Like, I'm gonna just start to narrow my life down. Like, observing meaninglessness can occur to us. The issue is if it tilts too far over to where we're like, yeah, nothing is meaningful. Even dharma, even kindness, like who gives a damn? Like I can be mean to anybody. Like if it goes top heavy, that's problematic because well, in short, because of cause and effect. Like
Mhm.
if we start to miss, if you miss a sitcom, no problem. if you cuss out a friend or say who cares, or you just never pick your dog up from the kennel, or your kid, like things can happen. You get a crazy bill, or someone, if you mistreat someone or something, like it rebounds on you in the world. So whether it's the view of emptiness that we're beginning to understand, or the view of impermanence, um we have to really be in touch with how, and you could say like how we're contemplating it, how we're processing it, and how appropriately. But the idea is like, yeah, it's kind of drawing that line between what is meaningful from my mind and my life, and what's not. And I'm purposely saying mind and life because I you can say draw the line with what's dharma and what's worldly, but the problem with that is that like that can create a lot of compression for people. The real issue, what makes something dharma or not, is if we're working with our minds, like taming our minds. you know uh in short, like I always thought, I was actually looking at it today. I like the real concise 4-line teaching that says, do no harm, benefit others perfectly, and train your mind. These are the teachings of the Buddha. And I mean, my point is though, is that working with our mind, taming our mind, is the real question. So but anyways, no, yes, about Dharma pets. I think that they're a good thing, for another side. I mean, first of all, like, we have to care for something else. So anything that causes us to care for someone else, I think from a Bodhisattva Mahayana point of view, is really good. Like
Mhm.
anything that, like, we didn't, like, I realized it once I became a parent. Like, you don't know what you're getting into, and you're in over your head. Like, anything that shoves us into responsibility and less self-cherishing, potentially, that's a good thing. It's disruptive, it's awesome. That's good for working with self-cherishing. And then the other thing about animals that's so neat is that because they can't communicate with us with words, we can't like it's a little more streamlined than a lot of our human relationships that get a little complicated. You know, a lot of history and BSing one another and that kind of thing. Like animals are just there. We're there. We don't particularly have to deceive them. They don't deceive us. You know, it can be a little straightforward. Yeah, I know. I mean, it's simple, but it's straightforward. So we have a dog. He comes in here some mornings, but not during classes and stuff. But they're good. Cool. Well, it was a good one again, and let me see if I can get us a dedication. I really like the conversation tonight, though. I think the teachings themselves help because it's like it's a really nice, juicy, provocative thing to think about. And we'll talk more about impermanence next week, though. Just so you know, if you get me started on something that big at the end, then we'll never wrap up. O sonam de ye tamje zigba ni tobne ne be ranam pamje ne chega na chi bala trugba ye sibe sole rowa nyoro sho. By this merit may we attain omniscience, defeat the enemy wrongdoing, and free all wanderers soon from the ocean of existence, churned by the great waves of birth, age, sickness, and death. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lama Jinpa. See you.
Thanks, Lama Jinpa.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hey
Thank
again,
you.
Sue.
Good
Everybody.
night.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye now.
Bye.